It's 12 o'clock in Frisco, Texas, and it's time for Smoker Broker Radio with Robert Mesh, a.k.a. the Smoker Broker. Robert is the owner of Small World Realty and has employed hundreds of real estate agents in his 17-year career. He has instructed and mentored over 10,000 real estate agents at the highly acclaimed Champions School of Real Estate and is considered an expert in Texas residential realty. Robert is also an advocate of true entrepreneurial spirit and has helped many to transition from corporate America into the world of self-employment. And now live from the studio to your world, the Smoker Broker.
Hey, welcome to Smoker Broker Radio. I'm Robert Mesh, and I am the guy they call the Smoker Broker. Happy Thursday. Hope everything's going well. Cruising through the weekend, holidays, everything, cooler weather, hot weather. I don't know. It's still warm out here. God, I think we still hit 90-something degrees the other day. So the weather always has a few issues up here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but it still is fall. It's a lot better than it is in the summer. Hope everything's going good. Continuing to cruise along in our day-to-day, new, normal, whatever normal. Lots going on. You know, you've got COVID out there, got elections out there. It's a mess. It's a mess. And it's the life we live, you know. So it's what makes it interesting. You can boo-hoo about it. You can, be unhappy with life or whatever, but it's not going to change anything. It's the world we live in, and we have to keep moving with it. There are horrible things out there. There always will be. Have to do the best we can to adjust to it and have a good attitude with it. That's what I try to do day to day. Because if I didn't, I'd be pretty miserable most of the time with the stuff that I have to deal with. So I try to keep a very good attitude as I go through my regular week. We're not going to talk a lot about intros like we always do with what's going on in the world, because I'm telling you, the topic we have today, it's the most difficult one we do. And all the agents that typically watch this particular show, this is the one that they typically like to watch because they don't understand the topic. So we're going to spend a full hour today on agency, and it's going to be a lot of takeaways, a lot of things that you might not understand, a lot of examples, to a lot of role play to give you a better example as to what and how this works. So hopefully it'll be a really productive show for a lot of people out there. Again, this one is not the one that has the most rah-rah and interesting for the general public side of it. But I can tell you for the agents, it's probably one of the better ones out there. And that is our core audience. I will say for clients, it actually is a good show. Or if you're an agent and you have a client going through these topics, this is a good show to tell them to watch, because it might help them understand. Because we can never explain agency to a client within a matter of an hour. I'm not sure we can explain it to most agents within a year. So it's a difficult subject, and this might help them have a better understanding. There are people that are watching the show today and the rest of this week where they are going through this right now. This very topic, or one of these topics we're going to discuss, they're going through it right now. So this could be very helpful to any of those individuals, and of course yourself. I promise you, if you're fairly new inside of the last 5 years or so, you probably don't necessarily get this. Even the people that think they do, most of the time don't. Now, one of the things that's helped me a lot over the years in understanding agency, and I don't talk about it on the show as much, most people know it anyways, but I'm definitely going to reemphasize it today. I've been a long-time instructor at Champions School of Real Estate, and that is where I learned how to understand this agency stuff. Because if you're going to teach it, you have to have the background and understanding as to what it does. And this is embarrassing to say, but I want to say for probably 2 or 3 years, I never taught that subject exactly 100% correct, because there were little things that would come up and I'm like, well, wait a minute. I thought that's how it worked. And
I was in your class.
What's that?
I was in your class. No kidding.
Yeah, that's why Brent still doesn't understand. He still doesn't understand. That's why he's on the show today, so he can learn. But for the longest time, you think but you really don't. And that's one of the advantages of teaching real estate, is that it reinforces and it makes you go research the topic. I don't think anybody's researched agency more than I have. I have gone back and forth with Trek. I've gone back and forth with TAR. I've gone back and forth with brokers and agency. It's amazing how many people just don't get this subject. And it's really not difficult. if you understand the basics of it, it's really not that hard. But if you're not paying attention, God, it's the worst. And it's the one that can get you in the most trouble too, because when it comes down to it, the bounds that we have to our clients, that's all you got, that's all you have. And it only takes one screw up for them to tear you apart with the agency and even in court, especially if they prove that there's some type of loss because of you. So it's going to be a good topic today. In fact, I just reminded myself to put a subject in here I wanted to talk about that I didn't put in the original preview of the course. As always, bring my buddy over here, Brent Holberg. He helps run SWR. He's actually a really smart guy. He knows how to do these things. Of course, we're joking when we're saying he doesn't understand intermediary and agency. He understands it better than anybody else. I will tell you one of the downfalls. I've been a big fan of doing the podcast at home because of COVID, and we actually enjoy it. But one disadvantage today, they are remodeling the house and they are hammering behind me. So if you hear a bunch of drills and hammering, or I look distracted, it's very possible that it's coming from those guys. They just can't be very quiet. What's that? Yeah, it's horrible. I thought that they were going to be a little more quiet today, but that's just not going to happen because they're like literally right above me. That's okay though. I usually can block out most annoying things, so we should be good there. But like I said, Brent is always the guy who knows what we're doing in SWR. He's the one that's also responsible for teaching all of our agents out there. We do run what's considered to be one of the largest groups in the country in Keller Williams. It might actually be the largest group in the country. And, I always tell everybody that. I'm very transparent. A lot of people, when I say that we have the largest team, they're like, oh, you must be massive. Look, we have a lot of team members. That doesn't mean we have the highest volume. And we still are a very moderate group when it comes to volume. I mean, we do well, but we're not like, there's some teams that have 8 or 9 people that probably are 500 times more.
But half are part-timers too. So
what's that? Well, yeah. And so that's a great point. And that's exactly where I'm going with this. We have, and I'm saying this a lot because a lot of times I'll put out there, in fact, I did today, I do preach the fact that we have the largest group because I do think that that's meaningful that we have that many people that are attracted to our team, but it doesn't mean like we're some massive conglomerate out there as well. We do house a lot of part-time agents. And of course, those part-time agents, it takes them time to develop and takes them time to get their sales volumes up. So I'm always very humble when it comes to our group. It is a large team, and we are very proud of the fact that it's a great landing place for a lot of firms, but it's not like everybody thinks we're like rolling in these millions and billions of dollars because we have that many people. Like, yeah, it's not. We're still working on them and getting there. Maybe someday we will, but we are very proud of the team that we have in place, and it is because of the principles we have. And more so than ever, this topic today is really going to show what the character of SWR and Keller Williams is in general, because we actually care about this subject. We actually care about how we're representing somebody, and that we know what we're doing when we represent somebody. And we try to be the industry leaders and show people out there that we are the ones that are guiding the light that way to say, look, this is the way you do this. You might not think that you understand it, but we're going to help you with it, even if you don't. Because in the end, if the other agent isn't on the same page with this type of agency, intermediary without, of course, there's not an intermediary without, you wouldn't have another agent, which we're going to talk about. But if there is, they have to be on the same page as us. They have to understand what it is that we're going through, because if they screw up, we could be held just as accountable. So there is some teamwork that's involved, even if it's alternative brokerage. Well, depending on what type of agency we're talking about. Of course, the inside ones are going to be just inside the teams. But sometimes you have agency that's affected by another brokerage, depending on what topic we're under. So we're going to talk about that too. But in the end, we still have to police what we are doing when it comes to agency, because it is such a difficult subject. There is no exact percentage here, but I think I have enough of the credentials to make this comment. I am willing to bet, and a lot of people are surprised by this, that of all the real estate agents, especially in the state of Texas, it is my belief that at least 50% of them do not understand this concept. And then of the 50% that think they understand the concept, they only understand it moderately well. They don't really understand the full thing. And there might be 15% of the agents out there that know exactly what it means. And, they don't run numbers on that because they don't take polls. I'm just talking by experience in the people I've taught over the years, which is a lot, and the people that I've met that have been in the industry for a long time, that's what I believe those percentages to be. Because I'm shocked by listening to them sometimes. I'm like, how can you not know that at this point in time? We're talking about people who are big. We're talking about big time real estate agents. So that's why the topic's so fascinating. It's when you become an academic in real estate, it's kind of a boring. Nobody really gives a damn about what the understanding of agency is until you're in trouble. And then once you're in trouble, you're like, I really need to know how to do that. And that's what we're here for. Okay. That's why we expertise in that material, to make sure that people don't screw up and agents don't screw up. Probably another good reason why I've never been sued in all the years I've been doing this is because I do watch over very closely what all the agents do and what they're doing, and make sure they understand these topics. We do these shows once a week so that everybody around us, not even inside of our Keller Williams world, but the other brokerages, so that they can get information out of it. But our crew, they're constantly getting this. They're constantly preached on what to do. And they have one-on-one support where they go back and forth with us when they go through one of these things. And I guess if I'm being real honest there too, I would say that, almost every agent that we have, when it goes to intermediary, they go straight through us and we end up working it for them, because they're just not going to be able to do it on their own with limited exposure to it. With the limited exposure, it takes years and years of doing it. It's one of those things that you literally have had to have done quite a few times before you're like, oh, I understand what's happening here. So it's nobody's fault. It's just you can only learn from a book so much when it comes to agency. Brent, am I telling the truth there? Is it not the most easy subject that we go through?
Yeah, because I think there's so many interpretations of it, and it's not just like black and white. I mean, it is, but not really. People obviously interpret it differently.
Yeah.
And there's so many facets to every side of this topic.
Yeah. It has so many different avenues that it ends up, and it's a lot of what if scenarios. And, if you're doing a flow chart, like with arrows, it's pretty screwed up because the chart does like this and like this and like that and like this. And then it goes, oh, what if you did this? Or what if you did that? Yeah. It's, I don't think it's very easy to do a flow chart on it. I've seen them done, and I just start laughing. I go, yeah, but there's about 10 arrows you missed on that one there. Right. So we can always have wrenches thrown in the process when we're evaluating what we do with agency. So let's start with the biggest takeaway of this particular show. I talk about a lot of things on the show when, of course, when we're broadcasting, I teach a lot of things when they're out there. And just to put a lot of emphasis on this next comment, I would argue this is the most important thing you need to know about understanding law of agency. In fact, you really can't go forward in agency unless you know this one simple step. You have to understand the difference between a customer and a client. Okay? Those new guys out there that are listening, you have to understand the difference, because if you don't know the difference and you start talking to those individuals, you are going to cause a lot of problems. Right? They are not the same. They're not the same type of person that we're dealing with. Okay? The biggest difference between the two. Okay, this is another big takeaway from the show. We can give advice and opinions to our clients, but we cannot give advice and opinions to a customer. All right, so if you're writing things down, that's a big one. You can give advice and opinions to your client, but you can't give advice and opinions to a customer. Now, you're going to see how important this is as we go through the show today, because as we start going through some of these topics, you're going to understand why you have to know that. And I'm going to do it like a broken record. I'm going to keep going back, because that's how important it is to understand the difference, because it all starts with that, right? Okay, let's go through. And so you take that information, store it away. And there's no doubt today's show, it is a teaching show. I mean, this is an instruction show. This is the highest level of instruction you get when it comes to real estate, things that you aren't shown on some TV screen or shown on, in some class that you go. You never get this level of how deep we're going to get into this. So it's going to be you might think it's a boring show for anybody that's not into real estate, but anybody who's in it, they're glued to it because they know they need to know these things. All right, let's talk about another foundation step in understanding agency. All right, there are two types of disclosures. And Let me also make an asterisk or an exception here. We do have people that listen outside the state of Texas. Today's show is a little unfair because we're going to focus in on the folks here in the state of Texas with the Texas agency laws, because that is our core listening and watching group. But anybody outside the state of Texas, you're running similar, you have similar laws in place. Okay, so it'll be a little different, but it's still the same topic. We're really talking about dual agency, no matter where you are in the country. We call it intermediary, but it's all the same thing. Okay, so we're going to be talking about this. So I apologize to anybody that's outside the state. They might not understand the terms, but the common sense side of it is still the same thing. All right, so there's two types of disclosures. Okay, you have what we call the disclosure of representation, and then we have what you call the disclosure of agency. Those of you who are still in the process of taking the test and the actual real estate exam, when somebody asks you what are one of the disclosures, and you answer the IABS, because the IABS is in fact the disclosure of agency. But if you only refer to the IABS as a disclosure of agency, you don't realize it's the disclosure of agency, you'll miss that question on the test. Because on the test, they ask you, which of the following best represents one of the disclosures in real estate? And the first thing you do is you're like, oh, it's IABS. But then you go on the answer key and you're like, IABS isn't there. And then it says disclosure of agency. Those are the same damn thing, right? The IABS is in fact the disclosure of agency. Information about brokerage services, all right? So that's for those of you still in the test process, that's a test question for you. A lot of people miss that because all they say in their head is IABS. It's really the disclosure of agency. So the disclosure of representation is an easy one. It's what you would expect when you're talking to somebody. The first time you meet someone, you introduce yourself. Hey, my name's Robert Mesh. I work for Keller Williams. I currently represent this person. Who you are, who you work for, and who you represent, if you represent somebody. That is the disclosure of representation. It is one of the only things that we allow to be done verbally or in writing. You can do either one. And it's really stupid that they say it can be done in writing, because nobody would do that when all you have to do is say that. I mean, how would that look? Hey, my name's Robert Mesh. I work for Keller Williams. I currently represent Mr. Jones at 1516 Smith Street. Can you sign that I actually told you that? And how stupid is that? Who's going to do it? So it's dumb that you can do it in writing, but it's one of the few things that we do that can be done verbally. Okay, so that you need to understand that. Then we have the disclosure of agency. Okay, and this one's more difficult. This one's a little harder to explain. So the disclosure of agency does revolve around the information about brokerage services. Now, Brent, I want you to give just an overview of the IABS from the professional side of it, and then I'm going to give the comfortable way of memorizing the IABS. So just tell them the structure of it.
Right. So it's a disclosure that you don't have to get your clients to sign at first unless you need to go on contract. You can send it to them, and basically it shows to them, all the ways that they can be represented. Right. That they have, they can be represented by an agent, or they can choose to not be represented by an agent. It just lets them know up front, where they stand. And so they don't have to think, oh, well, I didn't know I could have had an agent, or I didn't know that this guy worked for the seller. It lets them know in advance all the ways that they could be represented.
Right. So I'll give you good job on that. That's perfect. Let me give you a real informal way to understand what the IABS is doing, because this is in fact what it's doing. The IABS is like a Miranda rights for home buyers and home sellers. You have the right to be represented as a buyer. You have a right. I'm going by the paragraphs too, by the way. You have the right to be represented as a seller. You have the right to be represented by one agent on both sides that represents the buyer and the seller. You have the right to represent yourself. But let me tell you, anything you say can and will be used against you. This is a very professional, polite way of telling you, hey, if I were you, I'd go get somebody who knows what they're doing before you start screwing around with this. That is what the IABS is unprofessionally telling someone. It is telling someone, you are dealing with someone who knows what they're doing. You should go find someone that knows just as much, or if not more, than that individual. You have rights. You have rights as a buyer or a seller. You are instructed the first time we meet you, that document, it's supposed to be given on the first face-to-face or substantial dialogue. Now, I will tell you, for those in Texas, and this is a pet peeve of mine with the Real Estate Commission, always has been and always will. According to the Real Estate Commission, the first time you have a face-to-face conversation that is meaningful in real estate, trigger terms like, hey, I'm thinking about selling my house, or we've been thinking about buying them. Those are trigger terms that the IABS has to be given. Okay,
Well,
they tell you.
I never have meaningful conversations.
Say that again.
I never have meaningful conversations.
Well, so that's a good out, right?
Never.
Go, well, I wouldn't say it was meaningful. They weren't really listening to me. So, according to the state, that's what they want. And it's funny when you talk to some of the higher ups, they actually believe. If you ask the guys down there in Austin, they would tell you that like literally 80% of the agents abide by giving someone the IABS the first time around. I'm telling you right now, even if the commissioner is right in front of me, I'm like, that is not true.
Yeah.
It's not, and it's sick that anybody would even believe that. Don't get me wrong. I'm in full support of it. But don't even sit there and tell me you think that majority of the people do it. Now, I want to be really clear, because a lot of people watch, especially a lot of new agents out there. I'm mocking this process because of the way it's implemented. I'm not mocking the document. That document's more important to me than anything, because I think it's well written. I think and when you find out how we got there, it's even better. But I love the document itself. I don't like the execution of the way they demand it, because what they're telling you is, if you're at Albertsons and you have your name badge on, which you should, and somebody asks you, hey, I noticed that you're a realtor. We've been thinking about selling our house over in the Thousand Oaks area. How are the houses going for? That is a trigger term for a meaningful conversation. And when you start having that meaningful conversation, according to the state of Texas, while you're in there at the checkout line of Albertsons, you're supposed to whip out an IABS and say, hey, before I can go further, I need to tell you that you have rights, which is the weirdest freaking thing in the world. Anybody who's normal would be like, what the hell are you doing? Am I under arrest? Or, it's a weird document to present to somebody the first time around. So I'm going to tell you, teaching you wise, make no mistake, that the state requires, I would always teach you legally what's correct. That's what they would insist on you doing. But in reality, everyone knows that if you do something like that, you're going to run that person off. You have to use your common sense. And one thing that, and I'm going to advise you to talk to your brokers how they want you to do all this stuff, because this is how I do it. My way's not always right. But I'm of the opinion that the document's important. And believe me, I am going to address it with anybody that I meet the first time. I'm going to tell them who I am, what I do, and basically the substance of what's on that document. But I'd be lying if I said I gave it to someone all the time the first time around. There's no one that can argue with me in the face of this earth that that's normal.
I have it.
Somebody who's strange. Huh?
I have it tattooed on my chest, and I just open up.
That writing would get hard in that 10-point
right
that you'd have to have.
Well, having them sign is more awkward.
So that's a good comment to make, though, too. What's interesting, and if you want to talk about the hypocrisy of the document, is that it does not have to be signed. It says on the top it's for voluntary use. Now, it's mandatory for us to give the document, but it's voluntary whether they sign. So the funny part becomes if Trek ever came down on you and said, well, you didn't provide me the IABS. I'm like, yeah, I did. They just didn't sign it.
Right.
They go, well, how do you know? Well, I just turned the document over that day and wrote they didn't sign on this day, which you probably could have done yesterday if you wanted to. It's hypocritical.
Yep.
Okay, it's hypocritical.
Especially it's so crucial that you give it, right? So it's like,
and that's the point. We do not want you to. You've got to give some type of the information that's put in that document, because there's a reason why we did that, and we're going to tell you in a minute why that IABS exists. So it's very important. It's just the execution of it. So look, I give you a lot of takeaways on this show, and again, I tell you, this show is to teach you what's the real world out there. That's why the show has a lot of value to it. You're taught to give the IABS every time you meet someone, and which we're still telling you to do that. It's just the way that we're doing it, because we know that if you actually whip that document out the first time you meet someone in some type of weird situation, they're probably going to run. And we're not in the business of running people off. We're just not in that business. So you have to use your common sense. We are telling you the document is right on the money and it's what should be communicated. Whether you stick a piece of paper in someone's face the first time, common sense should set in that that's probably not going to be the best mode. Now, a lot of people like to, and I find this acceptable as well, a lot of people, when they're having their conversation, they'll talk about, they'll say, hey, look, I'm going to email you or I'm going to text you this document just so you know that you have it, because I think it's weird to actually give it to you. I've seen that before too, and that's pretty cool. I love one of the comments on the chat is, you guys are the black belt of real estate. I love that.
And he's my jiu-jitsu instructor.
I've never had that comment. That's a good one. I love that. Thank you. And you know, I would tell you, I would have to say our level is a black belt in real estate. I would hope that we are, if we're talking to that many people and explaining to everybody what we're doing, especially on this type of topic. So that's a huge takeaway. I mean, that alone saves, because so many of you struggle when you get into it and you're taught to do it, and you know when you do it the first time, you're like, God, this is freaking weird. And what happens with most is most do the obvious. They're like, it's too weird. I'm just not doing it. And that's a shame, because there should be some type of execution of the document. It's just the way you're taught is so freaking weird. Well, don't even get me wrong. What's that?
No, if you just address the elephant in the room and say, hey, I know this is kind of awkward. The state of Texas requires me to give this to you. You don't have to do anything with it right now. You can throw it in the trash if you want, but I have to give it and you need to look it over.
Yeah, and it's your common sense, your demeanor too. Like sometimes I'll even say, hey, look, you're asking me some questions that the state that's usually an expertise level that you're asking me. And anytime somebody asks me that, I have to tell you that I am a real estate agent. You know, there are certain ways people are represented. We're just having a general conversation right now. It depends on how you display it. Right? Because if you heard what I just said that way, they're not going to be like, oh, that guy's super weird. In fact, they might actually say that one knows what he's doing.
Right.
Because I appreciate that he told me that.
No one else has done that to him before.
Yeah, but the document itself is just, and you know, if you want the sick truth about this, you know, Brent, when do a lot of people get the IABS signed?
Closing.
Yeah, at closing. Let me tell you, here's a good takeaway from today too. This goes for my group as well, because I still see people do this. When you get and Brent's right, by the way, the majority of the agents sign the IABS at close because their broker asked for it.
Yep.
If you get let's say you've been working with someone for like 60 days and you're closing on the 29th of this month and you get an IABS signed on the 28th, you're pretty much documenting that you broke the agency law and that you
first of all,
you're supposed to
that's stupidity. Because I may have years ago had a friend that I forgot to give it to, but I was smart enough to backdate it.
Don't admit to that. But
that was past. That was like 8 years ago. It's way past.
Well past any time. Yeah. So it's funny that it's the stupidity of some of the things is really, really ridiculous, but it does crack me up in how it does. But it is uncomfortable for new agents because they're taught and they're trying to do it right, and they're also cute the first time around. Yep. Well, I need to know when I guess the number one question I get, when should I give this IABS? Because they know it's weird if they do it when they're supposed to. And I've always said I could argue with the commission. If anybody ever said we didn't give it the first time, I might not have given it the first time, but I damn well gave it quicker than anybody else did in the rest of the state, because it's true. It's true. Majority of them are signed way too late. So that's a great takeaway for today.
We can't even prove that anyways. I mean, an agent could just technically say, oh yeah, I gave it to them. They just didn't sign it. Prove it, right? You couldn't ever prove
That's what I'm saying. They refuse to sign.
Yeah.
It's hypocritical.
Yep.
They need to change the process.
Yep.
The commission can be very outdated at times, and they need to change that rule on how the explanation of that document is given. It's just weird. It's a great document. It's just weird. And while we're talking on the document, I'm going to tell you how we got to it, okay? By the way, this one today, if you think we're just going to dive into intermediary today or sub-agency, that's not necessarily true. We might spend this hour today getting to the setup of those conversations, and we might carry them on next week. But you can't get to those until you understand these points. So we're going to talk about those right now. If you really want to understand agency, and this is actually a really fascinating conversation for academics of real estate. If you don't understand it, you're like, this is really boring. I'm like, yeah, I agree with you. But if you really understand how this came about, it's pretty freaking weird, because this all changed in 1995. And that's not that long ago. If you look at how long we've been doing real estate in Texas, 1995 is actually pretty current. And that was the year that they switched this whole thing, because they started figuring out that something was really wrong. And here's some fascinating things about real estate in the state of Texas before 1995. One, it's so hard for the younger ones, because they're like, oh my God, I would never, how could you even do that? There was no such thing as a disclosure of representation. Okay, so that doesn't exist. There's no, hey, how are you? You don't even have to tell somebody who you are, even though they probably did it, right? Disclosure of agency doesn't exist prior to 1995. There is no IEBS. There are no rules that tell an agent they have to disclose to somebody who they are, what they're doing, or any of that type of stuff. So that's pretty fascinating as well. So all the consumers have no rights prior to 1995 as far as agency law goes. And here's the big one. Prior to 1995, there is no such thing as a buyer agent in the state of Texas, because there was no such thing as a buyer's representation agreement. There was no agency per se in the state of Texas prior to 1995. All it was a listed agent who was the listing agent who was a client to the seller. That's all that exists, right? So all this other crap that we deal with now, IABS, buyer's representation agreement, this stuff doesn't exist way back when. Now you have to pay attention and you have to follow along. If you don't have a buyer's representation agreement, that means one of the people in this transaction is not what? A client. All right? I told you we're going to keep going on this customer client thing, which means people who are represented, or people who are buyers in the state, is a bad word. People who are buyers in the state of Texas prior to 1995, they were customers.
Yep.
They were not clients. Now, I will tell you, anybody who watches the show that has purchased a house prior to 1995, this topic doesn't go over very well for some of y'all. Because some of y'all start catching on. I knew that was screwed up the way that they did that. And sometimes it's not pleasant, but it is a good learning experience for you. So we're going to kind of show you how this all develops. So those are fascinating things, right? That these things don't exist. None of this stuff exists. Now let's try to put that in perspective, why that's important to anybody, okay? So we owe advice and opinions to our clients, right? If we're working with the buyer prior to 1995 and there's no agency agreement, it means they're a customer to us. And if they're a customer to us, that means I can't give them what?
Advice and opinion.
Advice and opinions. Now, buyers are full of requesting for advice and opinions. In fact, that's all they ever do. So it's difficult in Texas prior to 1995, because when someone comes out and they want an agent to help them on the buy side, the common sense perception was that they were their agent. In fact, most people would respond if they said someone helped them in 1985 to buy a house, they would have said our agent. And in reality, it was not their agent. It was a seller's agent who that person didn't even know. That's pretty screwed up too. That an agent can work for a seller who they never even met, and they all owe all their loyalties, their duties and responsibilities to the seller they've never met versus the person who met them and asked them to help them. That's pretty screwed up.
Yep.
Now, the wheels are turning fast enough today. What are some of the obvious questions that a buyer asks us when they're ready to purchase a house? And Brent, they're the same as they are today. What are some of the things they ask us? When they want us to write a contract, what are some of the things they're going to ask us?
What do you think we should offer?
That's the number one. If you're playing the Family Feud, that's the number one answer. How much do you think we offer? And this is absolutely what type of question?
Well, an opinion.
It's an opinion or advice. Yeah, it's either one. right? It's the biggest one. What are some other ones, just for fun? What are some other things I might ask?
What should we get an inspection?
What should we get an inspection? That's good.
Yeah. Or who
Can
do
we
you
ask for closing costs?
Yeah.
What date do you think we should close?
Yeah.
Should we get a home warranty? All these things are begging for us to ask for advice and opinions. How much do you think it's worth? That's a big one too. That'd be number 2 up there on the Family Feud thing. So they're asking us all these questions. So prior to 1995, if you're a real estate agent and somebody's asking you those questions, common decency and common sense would dictate, what would you say to that person if they asked you that stuff?
Back then?
Yeah, back then.
Well,
And
common decency is
I'm looking for the wrong answer.
Well, you probably would help them.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's funny. I love, and I have a lot of faith in Brent, which is why he runs my stuff. But on a serious note, I ask people that question all the time. And the response is they always say, oh, well, they didn't give him any information. They didn't tell him anything. I'm like, see, that's the problem. I go, you're not perceptive enough to understand. I go, that's not what happened. I go, what happened was what the human decency thing is. Someone who came to you that's buying a $300,000 house that's going to make you're going to make $9,000 off this person. Are you really prepared not to answer the question, how much do you think I should offer on this house?
Right.
Most agents are probably going to answer that question.
Right.
Now, it's funny, when I used to teach all the advanced classes, like the continuing education ones where you have everybody that's done it prior to 1980 because they don't want to get on the computer anymore.
Yeah.
And they go in the class. All these people practice real estate prior to 1995. When we would discuss this subject, you'd see all of them, and all you'd see is the top of their heads. And none of them would raise their hand and say that's what they did. But when we were talking about it, they would do this because they knew it was screwed up. They knew it was weird. They knew it was weird to have this conversation of this person's asking me to help them, yet I'm really not supposed to.
Right.
Because in all honesty, who are they supposed to be giving their advice and opinions to prior to 1995?
Yeah, just the seller.
A seller who they don't even know.
Yep.
All right, so that's weird. So what happened, and I'm really condensing this conversation, what happened way back when is every part of the transaction started to question this. So you'd close on a property and you'd have a seller go, hey, I kind of get the feeling that other guy who was me, the agent, was helping that person. I got a feeling that they didn't come up with that offer on their own. And in reality, I'm paying that guy, so he should be working for me. So I don't like that. So you have all these lawsuits and these complaints pile up. But then at the same time, you have a lot of buyers that go, it's kind of weird that I end up paying a lot for this house and you're the one who told me to do it. It's almost as if you were telling the seller everything that I was telling you behind my back.
Well,
and if the agent's competent and they know what they're doing, Brent, how would they answer to that person when they ask that?
Oh, well, they say, well, if they're competent, say, well, technically I represent the seller.
There you go.
Yeah.
I'll tell you how they actually said it. They go, you're damn right I did that because that's my job. I represent them. I don't represent you. I'm not supposed to be telling you what to do. I'm supposed to be telling them what to do.
Right. And to your first point, I bet you a lot of sellers said to those agents, hey, it's kind of funny that the buyer put in an offer for the lowest that that we would take.
That's right. And you and then they go, I want to make sure I understand this. I paid you, my listing agent, and that other idiot who was someone like me, 3% a piece to bring me a buyer who got me down 20 or 30K less than I wanted to sell. Okay, do I have that right?
Yes, sir.
That's right. Stupid, right? And on the other side, when the buyer says that, when we tell the buyer what the real truth is, that's when they stop for a second. They're like, whoa, hey, nobody told me that.
Yeah.
Nobody told me that you didn't represent me. And y'all, pay attention, connect the dots, because where we're going with this is the creation of the most sacred documents in real estate. This subject alone, when they started having that problem, this is where in the early 90s and the late 80s, they started getting all these complaints and they're like, this whole thing's screwed up. Mm-hmm. None of these people know who's representing them. Nobody trusts who's representing them. New rules have to come into play. So in 1995, they passed a bill, Senate Bill 489, if I'm not mistaken, that said, no more of that crap. No more of that. When you meet somebody the first time, you're going to tell them who you are, who you work for, and who you represent. And then if they start having meaningful conversation with them, you're going to tell them that they have rights. You're going to tell them that who you are and you can represent them, or they can go to somebody else and get represented, or they can represent themselves. It sounds like a really stupid conversation and we're just babbling back and forth. But if you're listening, it's as meaningful as it gets.
Yeah.
Because there was a very direct way they said, we're going to fix this. This isn't going to happen anymore. We're not going to allow this. I don't know who works for who and who works for all that, that type of person. By the way, those of you who have heard the subject before, but you're really not that apt on it, those of you who've always questioned and you're asking, what is sub-agency? If you've been paying attention, all those agents prior to 1995 that were helping somebody on the buy side in the state of Texas, that is a very pure definition of sub-agency, because these are people that are not clients, but they're still helping them, but they're helping and they give advice and opinions to someone they don't even know. That is the closest fine definition you're ever going to have of sub-agency, because it's too difficult to describe in a book. You want the answer to how you figure out sub-agency? You got to go back in the past and understand how we did real estate before to get it now. Now, you know what's stupid about sub-agency? And this is another thing I begged the commission to change.
On the MLS?
Nobody does the damn thing anymore.
Yep.
Look, this is what modern day sub-agency looks like. Hey, I want you to, I need you to help me find some houses. There's some duplexes over here on whatever avenue, and I need you to open them up for me. I'm a savvy investor. I don't need your advice and your opinions. I don't need you to represent me. I just need you to open up those doors. And by chance, if you get paid to do that, so be it. I don't care. I don't want you representing me. And that's what it looks like if someone says it. But here's what someone who doesn't understand it would do. If the realtor's doing their job and they're explaining the IBS, they'd be like, when that person says that, they're like, hey, I understand. I go, but you have to realize that if you do that, you're basically telling me that you don't want any advice and opinions. And you're also telling me that whatever you tell me, that I can go and I need to go tell the seller. There's no buyer in the world would be like, that sounds awesome. Let's sign this agreement acknowledging that. Nobody's going to do modern day sub-agency. It's rare. In fact, as close as you're going to get is if you have a relationship with the new builder and they're letting you maybe put your signs in front of the house, you might cross that conversation. In fact, I think that's probably the only reason that they still actually have it out there. But I'm telling you right now, 99% of you are not going to be doing sub-agency when you're practicing modern real estate, especially in the state of Texas. So it's really silly that the subject comes up, but if you ever question what it is, that's what it is. All right. So let's fast forward. Now we have all these documents. By the way, the buyer's representation agreement came later. Even after Senate Bill 489, there still really wasn't any buyer representation agreement. So there still wasn't any clients until much later, where someone finally put an end to all this nonsense and said, hey, look, they got to be represented if they want to. This is dumb. Just because the seller pays for them doesn't mean that they can't be represented. Okay, so that changed a little bit later too. All right, where are we at time-wise? 12:45. God, I don't want to. We'll go ahead and we'll start the.
You want to play open houses?
Well, so that's actually going to be the punchline to how we bring all this together. I'm probably going to save that one for the next show. I think I'm going to start intermediary right now.
Yeah.
And then, in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a brief interview of intermediary. And the next week, we're going to continue the same conversation. But what we're going to do is we're going to take the basics of intermediary, and then we're going to get more complicated with it. And then what we're going to do is go through an open house. And, this is really super hypocritical. I always bash in open houses. I'm like, historically, in open houses were never that great of a thing. They are right now because you need to do them. But historically, an open house really wasn't a strong way to sell a home. And I would bash the process at times. But I'm going to tell you, there is no better teacher of full agency law than understanding an open house. Because an open house, you go through everything. You go through customer, you go through client, you go through disclosure of agency, you go through disclosure of representation, and you don't even know it when you're doing it. You want to see agency law broken? Go sit in an open house. Go sit at 99% of the open houses. Every damn agent in there is probably breaking their agency bounds the moment they open up their mouth and talk to someone who's coming from the outside, because common sense should dictate that the person coming from the outside is what to us?
Customer.
A customer, which means we can't give what to them?
Advice and opinion.
Yet then they ask us, hey, I saw this house down the road. What do you think about it? And the moment the lips open up, you got yourself in trouble because you're not supposed to be talking about stuff like that. You know, if you want to talk about the real preview of an open house, and this is the thing that chaps my hide more than anything, I love it when a seller begs us to do open houses, or they start beating us up because they're like, you're not doing enough open houses. I always comically laugh under my breath. I'm like, if you only knew what the hell went on in an open house and why we're doing it, you would never want me to do an open house, because everybody out there that's watching this right now, and especially those that are new, even the primary reason most people do open houses is because they want to pick up leads or get some type of lead generation. And what's sad about that is the last reason that you should be doing the open house. There's only one reason that you do an open house, and it's the most obvious. It's so that you can sell the damn house and represent the seller that the way we're supposed to. That's why you're supposed to do an open house yet every Sunday and Saturday. Flags, new agents out there, funneling through. Hey, do you have an agent? Do you have an agent? If one of the golden rules that we teach in SWR is when you're at an open house, if the seller was sitting on the other side of that wall and listening to you, which, by the way, 64% of them are with security cameras now.
Yep.
In fact, I think our Go broker today is actually talking about houses that have security views in them. They're listening to you. You have to say to yourself, did everything I just say to that buyer, would the seller have been okay with it? Because if you utilize that, you're probably okay, but most never do. All right, so that's going to be a good preview for that one. So we're going to talk about that next week. Before I forget, before I give my last overview of intermediary, I want to always thank our sponsor. We're very grateful to have sponsors on the show, and we have a fantastic home inspector that sponsors our show. We always offer choices when we have when we offer inspectors to our buyers. We have to, because we don't want to say that we just said this one person is in fact the person that you have to use. We want them to choose it, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that, look, here's three choices, but that guy right there, Martin Cooley, is the one we use 99.9% of the time. He's just one of the best out there. He's done it for the longest time. I've never seen him screw up. His bedside demeanor is outstanding. He doesn't scare anybody, but he tells them like it is. If he flags something, then I know to be worried about it, because it is an issue. And it's nice for someone like me who reviews all those documents inside the firm, because it helps me. He paraphrases it in such a way that I don't have to read through 65 pages to find out what's wrong. So if you ever need a really good home inspector, anybody inside the Keller Williams, anybody outside the Keller Williams, this guy, Martin Cooley, his number's flashing there at the bottom. There's his bio. He's a veteran too. I always forget to tell everybody that. The BPG inspection folks actually funnel through Fidelity. They're in their umbrella, but just a great guy, a great friend. We're always very thankful to have him as one of our primary vendors. So thank you, Martin. Always appreciate you. Okay. A few more minutes. Let's talk about, or let's set up the show for next week as we get into intermediary. Okay. Those who are watching out of the state, for the most part, intermediary is dual agency. That's what we're talking about. The difference between the two are really subtle as far as whether an agent is appointed or not. Okay. But for the most part, it's the same thing. There's some really subtle differences, but nothing worth discussing. If you're trying to follow, we're talking about, a dual agency. So in Texas, you have two types. You have intermediary with appointments, and you have intermediary without appointments. In an intermediary with appointments, this is where, so let's say I'm the broker, Brent is representing one of our sellers, and then let's say David, who's one of my agents, is representing a buyer, and they want to do a transaction together. That's what we call an intermediary with appointments. The broker has appointed Brent to the seller, and the broker has appointed David to the buyer. Nothing changes.
Nope.
Business as usual. They can continue to give their advice and opinions to their clients. They only have to tell them that, hey, I just want you to know that we work for the same broker. That's it. Everything else is the same. Intermediary without is when Brent represents the seller and he works for me, and he brings one of his buyers who's a client. not a customer. Both of these people have to be clients. It's a key component of this. He brings his client to his listing client, and that buyer wants to put an offer on that house. Now we're talking about an intermediary without appointments. Now, as the broker, we're not appointing anybody to that transaction. Brent's going to do it on his own. But here's the trick, and this is what will consume the next hour next week. At this point, he can no longer give advice and opinions. And if your head's spinning the right way this morning, that ain't easy. It is not easy to do a transaction with a buyer nor a seller where we are not giving advice and opinions. It's just flat out difficult. What's that?
To talk about feeling useless, you know?
It is. It does. And it's not a practice. Common sense should dictate to you right now that intermediary without is not something that most brokers encourage. In fact, a lot of brokers ban it. A lot of brokers will not allow you to do that type of transaction. And you're going to see why next week, because when you start talking about what can happen in this, it's pretty bad. You have to expertise in that material to make sure you understand what it is that you're doing when you go through and you start communicating to intermediary. Because remember, the average agent, even under 5 years, if we test them on intermediary, most of them will fail. Most of them really can't even explain it. Do you really think some client who was sitting at their house at their kitchen table and the Stars game was off in the back and they had this big 12-inch hoagie that they're eating and mayonnaise is dripping down their face while you're talking about intermediary? You know, do you really think they're listening? And do you really think they understand what you're saying when it takes you probably 5 years to make that same assumption in there? It doesn't work like that. And that's why the topic can be very dangerous. And the real problem with the intermediary is they don't start listening until they're affected by it. Mm-hmm. The moment you start telling them that you can't give them advice and opinions, now we got a problem. Yep. And that's when they start saying, well, you never told me that. I'm like, yeah, I did. I go, you were screwing around watching Beavis and Butthead, though, and eating all that food, and you weren't listening to a word I said. But now you want to listen now that we're in it, because now it's a problem. And that causes us a problem, too. And that's where this subject becomes very dangerous with an average agent who doesn't understand how to do this. And this is why we discourage you doing the intermediary without. Intermediary with, power to you. As long as you know the one thing to do, that you work for the same broker and you disclose it. And we'll talk about the paperwork too, how the paperwork trail works next week as well. But I think this is a good subject to open up. You know, we got through talking about the IABS. I'm probably going to start the show off next week with talking about the buyer rep agreement before we get into intermediary, because I want y'all to understand that a buyer rep agreement doesn't necessarily have to be done for you to be a client. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of people that think you have to have a signed buyer's rep agreement. There's a lot of people in the state of Texas who think, and these are veteran agents too, that think if you don't have a buyer rep, that means you're a sub-agent. That means you don't understand what sub-agent means, okay? And I'm going to give you a good example next week so you can understand the difference between the two. Y'all, that's one of the most powerful shows we do from an educational standpoint. I hope you enjoyed it. I would urge you, anybody that's around you that's a new agent or that's struggling or that this subject comes up, you should tell them to watch the show. The show's on archive all the time on the KBGI Facebook page. All you have to do is flip back. My logo is very readily available, and you can see it from a mile away. All you have to do is scroll back through and pick up the shows. This one obviously will be one that's watched a lot on archive, but this is probably one of the better shows out there where you cannot get this information from just sitting in a regular market center or a regular brokerage and listening, because these are usually not the subjects that are discussed. So great stuff for y'all. Lots of takeaways from today. If you were watching, you should have taken a lot of notes, and you're going to take a lot more notes next week. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys have a great week. We will see you guys next Thursday.